understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How you doing there? The podcast today is going to be intercontinental, John. Intercontinental, because I am sitting in Christchurch in New Zealand. You really do feel that you're actually at the end of the world here. You really, really
next
feel
stop for you is Antarctica.
Absolutely. And I'm actually talking to John a day in advance. I'm talking to you from the future.
Yes,
I am.
you are. How weird is that?
Time traveled. I'm talking to you from the future. Anyway, it's great to have you. I'm on this tour, you're probably aware, down Australia and New Zealand. I have two more gigs. I have a gig here tonight in New Zealand. I have two more gigs. I just think we told you about them at the top of the show in Melbourne and Sydney. It's been a wonderful trip. But we're going to, John, not do the podcasts about this part of the world today. What we're going to do for this week's podcast is we're going to do a discussion on the biggest news of arguably the last 3 years, which is the peace plan in Gaza, the peace plan in Israel, the fact that the world has shifted on its axis, whether this can work, what it tells you about where people's traditional positions were, and more importantly, we're going to focus on the key country, which isn't America, which isn't Israel, which isn't the embryonic state of Palestine. It is the kingmaker in the region, the real financial muscle behind everything. And we know that Donald Trump wants money as much as anything else. It is Saudi Arabia. We're going to be talking to the great Irish comedian, Andrew Maxwell, who has just come back from the Riyadh Comedy Festival, where he performed in front of 8,000 screaming Saudi Arabian kids, comedy fans. Max also has the added insight. His wife is Egyptian, his kids are Arabic, and he knows the region extremely well. So we're going to talk to Max in a minute. But what I'm going to do is set this up, John, on the basis that what went before in the Middle East. And you remember we did the piece on the Middle East, the start of the Gazan war?
We did that 3-part series.
Yeah, so I want to just again look at what has happened and how it's changed. So in the past, the world, when it came to Israel and Palestine, was very split along what I would call ideological, received wisdom, a certain amount of pan-Arabism, a certain amount of anti-colonialism, in the sense that the Palestinian cause was an umbrella movement that brought together a whole host of people in the West who might not necessarily have been ideological bedfellows, but they came together for a variety of reasons. And at the core of that was the notion that this was still part of the Cold War.
Yeah.
That the Israelis were on the American side, the Palestinians were broadly on the left, i.e. Soviet side, because their supporters tended to be from that part of the world, and that no peace could be done without really the big left-right powers coming together. What this peace, the Trump peace, has done is blown that consensus out of the water, because you have the Qataris, who are representing Hamas, but who are a monarchy in the Middle East, together with Egypt, which is representing the Muslim Brotherhood, that has been always an anti-monarchy Middle Eastern power.
Yeah.
Together with the Americans, with the Europeans sidelined and now coming back on side simply to save face, all of whom are in a coalition now, which looks very, very different to the old thing. So what I want to do here before we talk to Max is set up the way the world might have changed, John.
Yeah. It's interesting though as well. You've mentioned a lot of obviously the Middle Eastern countries, but I was watching some of the footage the other day of, the big signing and all the rest. And Pakistan has also had a major input into this too. So it's much broader than just that. And Saudi, who we're going to talk about now, Saudi and Pakistan have recently created a new alliance between them. People are talking about that, so it might be an embryonic kind of Muslim NATO kind of vibe.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but Pakistan is the only Muslim nuclear power. This is the most important thing, right? So it is a massive, massive player in the region. And of course, Saudi Arabia has relations with Pakistan and has relations with Egypt. But let's just talk about what was the case. Many, many years ago, Edward Said, who I interviewed, I was lucky enough to interview, wrote a book called Orientalism. And Orientalism was this idea that basically when Westerners, starting with Marco Polo, go to the Orient, go to the East, that rather than analyze, they emote and they use words like exoticism and weirdness and unusualism, that they're not really taking the Eastern people that seriously. That it's a whole set of cliches that we bring to analyze. And that was Edward Said's worldview. He called it Orientalism. It was a sort of an infectious disease of the European intellectuals, which basically you can see that even when we talked about, remember we did that podcast about Napoleon conquering Egypt in 1798. And it's the same sort of idea that the French arrived with this perception of harems and exoticism and hashish and all sorts of things, right? Whirling dervishes and everything like that, right? Rather than dealing with people from...
And more recently, just oil.
And just oil, but rather than just dealing with them as just normal people, right?
Yeah.
There was something, there came with some baggage. So if you look at, right, so in the old days, right? And the old days are now last week, John. This is the way the world is going so quickly, right? That basically you had, on the pro-Palestinian side, you basically had what I would call pan-Arabist European intellectuals, right? That they were people who supported the administrations of the Ba'athist country, right? Syria, Egypt under Nasser, and Iraq, even under Saddam Hussein. And what actually their worldview was framed also by proximity to Moscow. And they basically thought that the pan-Arabist movement was an anti-colonial movement. And so if you were an anti-imperialist European, if you were guilty about colonialism, you had to be on that side. So that was one constituency that was very much for the Palestinian state.
Yeah.
A second constituency, which was rested uncomfortably with those people, was the constituency that supported the monarchists, which are the Saudi Arabians, the Qataris, the UAE, the Bahrainis, who are basically Arab monarchs. Now, this was much, much less easy for European intellectuals to support, but they supported them on the basis that, yes, we don't like monarchy, but these people represent the average Arab on the street. Right. So what was called the Arab street came to be represented, let's say hesitantly, by these monarchies. So lots of European and American intellectuals and political commentators, and largely people of the liberal left, said, well, we can hold our nose about Saudi Arabia and the UAE as long as they are representing their people, which is the average Arab. That was another constituency. And then, of course, there was the sort of what I would call the anti-Christian, anti-Catholic liberal idea, which always seemed to think that, well, extreme Catholics are really wrong, but, extreme Islam, we can justify that. You can explain that away from our nastiness and the way in which we treated them. So it was a kind of a bizarre other part of this strange coalition. And then, of course, you have the general anti-American, right? Which is most exemplified with the anti-Trump stuff, right?
Yeah.
That America is bad, it's the great Satan, it's a terrible colonial power, it's imperialist, it's a bully, la, 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 la. So they all lined up on one side. And then, of course, you have what I call the tankies.
Tankies? What's a tankie?
Tankies is this idea, there's lots left. In fact, people accuse one of our presidential candidates of being one, which are the pro-Soviet left, that basically they justified tanks rolling into Czechoslovakia and Hungary on the basis that the people of Czechoslovakia and Hungary didn't understand what they were rebelling against, and the Soviets had to use tanks to put down these counter-revolutionaries. So these are deep communist, not deep Moscow insiders. They're all over Ireland, by the way. There's loads of these fuckers in Ireland, right?
And an RTE.
Amazing, right? And RTE is full of them. RTE is rammed with tankies, right? And the left in Ireland is rammed with it. And then, of course, you have the proper, what I would call human rights people who are saying, oh, this is actually about good versus evil, powerful versus the weak, the human rights of people. So you have all this coalition coming together, many of whom said there cannot be a peace orchestrated by the likes of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, right? Now what we have, and we can talk about whether it lasts or not, because the second phase of this peace agreement is always going to be the hardest.
That's going to be a tricky bit. Yeah.
was the same as the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement. Actually getting the ceasefire wasn't the hard bit. The hard bit was negotiating the decommissioning and the political structures and the la after that, because the unionists, of course, were terrified that the IRA would get control. Ironically, now Sinn Féin is in control of Northern Ireland, but it took 30 years, right? But let's go back. So all these people are on one side, John. And right now, I think they have been flat-footed, are outsmarted, are outmaneuvered by what has happened, which is this weird coalition of Trump's America. So it's MAGA, together with Qatar, together with Egypt, and now the 20 other countries that lined up yesterday, ranging from Canada to Hungary.
Yes.
From the United Kingdom to China, from Indonesia as the largest Muslim country in the world. People forget that, the largest country in the world, to the likes of Norway. Now, I'm sure certain people in the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs will be smart. Why weren't we invited? Because we don't count, right? Okay, so let's talk about it. Why is this coalition emerging? Maybe the microcosm for this coalition emerging is the world is changing dramatically. And the place to gauge that change isn't Tel Aviv, isn't Jenin, isn't Washington, isn't London, isn't Beijing. It's actually Riyadh. What is changing in Riyadh is leading the world. And that's why I want to talk to Max, because he's just come back from there. He is also representative, I would say, for those of you who have never been to Kilkenomics, of a Kilkenomics vibe, which is comedians doing their thing and explaining the world, not just with humor, but with the way in which they think. So why don't we go straight to London, where Max has just come back. That's Andrew Maxwell, Irish comedian from Riyadh. And as I said, a man whose wife is Egyptian, whose kids are Arabic, who's kind of vested in the region as well. Let's go and talk to Max. Max, how are you? Great to see you.
Great. Yeah, great. Thanks, dude. Yeah, it was amazing. It was, like you said in the introduction there, comedians see the world through a different lens. And exclusively for us, that lens is how good's the audience. And in that regard, Saudi Arabia was a revelation, man. The crowds were mind-blowingly good.
Go on. Tell me.
Well, it's an incredibly young population. And they have, since their country started opening up in the last 5 odd years or whatever it is, they're on Netflix, they're on YouTube, they're listening to podcasts, they're watching comedy clips, and they're massive comedy fans. It really reminded me of, this is sort of a take that only Irish people, and particularly Irish people of our generation, Dave, could really get. We, as I've said on stage in Ireland, we middle-aged Irish people are the last people on earth to have lived in medieval Europe. Right? The kids in Ireland have no conception of what we lived in. We lived in a world of moving statues. The Catholic Church was all-powerful. Divorce, abortion were banned. Condoms were banned. We lived in a terror-adjacent society. And growing up in the 80s and 70s, it just felt like it was never going to change. It would never change.
Yeah.
And in a space of, 10, 15 years, we became a tech and pharma global hub. But we were still getting American and British comedians and Aussie comedians, but particularly the Yanks, would come to Kilkenny or come to Dublin or Galway. And they expected us to be riding around on pigs and... Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of felt like the culture clash. I've worked and spent a lot of time in the other Gulf states, Qatar and the UAE, Bahrain and Oman over the years, gigging, usually to expats, it has to be said. But in this case, I just wasn't prepared for how much it was nothing like I imagined it to be. And I'm a news junkie.
I know you are.
So I was baffled by how much of a blind spot I had. It's just extremely youthful. And I remember that when it turned into the early 90s in Ireland, we were like, God, this might happen. We might become normal.
Yeah.
And you think exactly the same sort of transition is happening now. That's the
Without
framework
a
you
doubt.
should look at it. You should look at it in that sort of framework of a country that was dominated by one ideology and dispensing with that ideology from the top down and the bottom up and changing completely.
Well, I think it's more that they're keeping the ideology. Its position in the power structure is changing. There's not a Taoiseach in Ireland since the great changes in Ireland still doesn't attend mass. They're all still practicing Catholics. You know what I mean? It's the lid's being lifted off the pot.
Is this an MBS driven thing?
Yes. I mean, it's ultimately, yes, it is. And that's a strange thing for any comedian in the West is de facto a liberal. You know what I mean?
Yes.
By our nature. And you go, well, this is all this, what I would consider positive change that's happened in Saudi. And also that ripples out across the entire world, and not just the Islamic world. Where Saudi goes, the rest of the Islamic, particularly Sunni world, goes.
Yes. You're saying by having something like the festival, I don't want to get focused completely on the festival, but I want the comedy festival to be emblematic of greater change, that this is a signal of something going on deep in the society. And as a result of that, it's a crucial sort of example.
Absolutely. I think you can have a Formula One race and nobody questions whether the culture is changing. You know, the next thing into this arena that I did, it was me, Jimmy Carr, and Louis C.K., 8,000 people in an arena. And the next people in were the tennis classics. Again, you can have John McEnroe can bat a ball around and nobody thinks the society's changing. But comedy's different. You know, from the Saudi perspective, what a high wire act. You know, it's the audacious level of their ambition, which I think provokes a lot of envy and gall in the West.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about exactly about this. Is what, when you were there talking to people, what did you come away with about A, Saudi Arabia, B, MBS, the structures, the top-down structures, C, the bottom-up structures, the kids who are at your gig, but also we're talking about a capital city of what, 10 million people, 8 million people? These are huge places.
I think it's about 8 million in Riyadh. Now, again, it could be, any of my thoughts on this are obviously within the bubble of the comedy festival. I spoke to quite a lot of Saudis while kicking around. I went into a lot of the bigger name acts, basically flew in on the day and left on the day or the day after. I came in 4 days earlier because I was fascinated. What's this all going to be like? But all my observations would have to be predicated on the fact maybe they're their observations of Riyadh rather than Saudi all told.
Yeah, but nonetheless.
So I suppose as far as the ruling class there, they've basically, from what I can take from it, it's basically sort of like perestroika is what they're attempting, you know, and when any system that isn't a democracy, no matter what you want to brand it as, at that moment of desire for change is when it's at its most vulnerable.
Yeah.
So it feels like they have the money, they have the ambition, and they know they have to move, you know, that old Silicon Valley expression, you know, move fast and break things. They know if they don't do it quick, you know, the forces of reaction within their society, which have been suppressed, but surely they mustn't have gone away. I had lunch at the Irish Embassy with our ambassador, Jerry Cunningham, and we were talking about the religious police who MBS has shooed off the streets. These were a nightmare, particularly for women. Like their job was to drive around basically bullying women. It must have been incredibly unpleasant.
Yeah.
You know,
And you're saying they're gone.
They're gone. They're all gone. Women can wear what they want. There is still some women in niqabs. That's the full covering. But I would say walking around in malls and shops and restaurants that I was in Riyadh, most women were just in a hijab, so scarf, and alabaya, which is sort of long, sort of essentially gown. But other than that, they were, you know, but there was no rules. There isn't anybody to enforce rules. The other thing to note, which was kind of astonished me, is I saw no cops. There was no state authority on the streets. They weren't around the venues. There was just, you know, private security, you know, dudes in t-shirts that says security on it.
As you'd get in any gig.
Yeah, exactly. So there was no outer expression of state power.
Wow.
So let's talk about the state power. Just give me a quick part of history. The House of Saud, who are they? Who is the top man? How did they get to the position they are? Because again, we're talking about 100-year history of the House of Saud.
Yeah, so the House of Saud are from Riyadh. That's their power base. We all know it in the decolonization concept of that all the borders around the developing world, Africa and most of Asia, were pretty arbitrary and set up by the Brits and the French, Sykes-Picot famously, you know. So it didn't take into account a lot of tribes. But within Saudi, you know, tribe really matters.
Yeah.
It's probably actually of more importance than the difference between being Welsh and Scottish. It's a deeper thing. You know, you've got bonds of kin that are profoundly deep, but the Saudis are from Riyadh. They had arch rivals in the Hashemites who were out of Jeddah. Jeddah is the city on the Red Sea coast that is, it's styled as the gateway to Mecca. It's how all the pilgrims making Hajj would have sailed in there. So it always had a slightly more cosmopolitan vibe. And they were the sort of arch rivals of each other. And the Hashemites had sort of helped the British, Lawrence of Arabia, in the First World War. And when the Ottoman Empire collapsed straight after the First World War, the new Turkish Republic disbanded the Caliphate. The Caliphate is basically the head of Sunni Islam.
Yes.
It's a very important role. I guess the closest thing is like the Pope.
It's the Vatican.
Yeah, it doesn't quite align, but yeah. And the top guy in the Hashemites, he just proclaimed himself to be the Caliph.
Ballsy move, it must be said. Ballsy move. You got to give it to him.
Yeah,
declaring yourself Pope is it's very medieval.
Well, he thought he had the backing of the Brits, and then the Brits pulled out on him. So basically, it's everybody else all the other tribes in Arabia backed the House of Saud at the time, and they won custodianship of the two holy sites in Islam, which are Mecca and Medina. And that is a profoundly powerful role. And the fact that the Saudis then didn't take the caliphate, although they had the power and they literally had control of the two holy sites, has made them incredibly culturally powerful within the Sunni Islamic world, certainly.
So from the economic perspective, everyone always talks about, hold on a second, Saudi is a massive player. The reason is it's very rich. It's got all the oil. You're saying, yes, that's absolutely the case. But it also has this cultural heft in terms of being the custodian of the holy sites.
Absolutely. So that's where their power is. And you got to remember that they secured that power before they discovered the oil.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
So that's why it's so consequential how Saudi goes.
Tell me now, so when you're in Saudi Arabia, they've seen what the West did in Iran. They've seen the Shah. They've seen Saddam Hussein. They've seen Afghanistan. They've seen Syria in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
And they're saying we don't want any of that carry on.
Absolutely. Yeah, we the West have given the Middle East a truly awful example of what liberal Western democracy looks like. To them, it looks like chaos. The young people that I spoke to, they look at all that and they don't want that. They don't want chaos. So although there's no denying it, the Riyadh Comedy Festival, the snooker, the golf, the tennis, the Formula One, all the rest of it, the esports, which the Saudi National Sovereign Fund just bought EA Sports for $55 billion. They're a huge player in esports, Olympics and all that sort of carry on. It is bread and circus, without a doubt. But from the perspective of all the young Saudis I spoke to, they were like, this is so much better than
what it was. A, than Iraq, and B, what it was 10 years ago. Now, you said something to me very interesting. You compared it to going, there was from Henry VIII to, what was your quote?
Oh, it was like, they're basically in 10 years, they're going from Henry VIII to Clement Attlee. You know what I mean? And they are speed running it. And you go, well, that's, it's all top down, it's all surface, da-da-da. But again, from an Irish perspective of my generation, we speed ran it.
We did?
Yeah.
If you think about it from the hysteria of the moving statues in the early 80s, where it was literally an episode of The Simpsons. There's whole villages of Irish people staring at a statue of the Virgin Mary until she moved. At no point anybody on RTE News pointed out that the clouds were moving behind her. We went from there to, Intel's just opened another fab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That was in 15 years. Less.
Now, I'm with you, and I think the listeners are with you, but the difference is Ireland did that with a conversation with itself, an inconsequential small island that doesn't really matter. Matters to us, but doesn't matter to the rest of the world. Saudi Arabia really matters, right? Saudi Arabia has got relations with Egypt. It's got relations with Pakistan. It's got relations with Israel. And of course, it's got the money that Donny wants. It's got relations with Trump as well. So explain to me what you are sensing, seeing, hearing about its new role in the Middle East.
Well, I think, again, it's that sort of thing of you don't see any outer manifestations of politics. Okay, so there isn't going to be any pro-Palestine flags. There's none of that. All the royal houses in the Gulf vehemently hate the Muslim Brotherhood, which started in Egypt, which is is basically, the cornerstone of all political Islam, right?
Yes.
So that takes in Hamas, who are in Palestine, and the various jihadi groups all across the Middle East in the Sunni context,
Yes.
So they hate political Islam, particularly the Emiratis.
Can I just stop you there? That's because ultimately these are monarchs and they believe in family enterprises. And political Islam is a bottom-up movement. And is that why the Turks support the Muslim Brotherhood? Because the Turks are a democracy. They've made their transition.
Well, it's even more specifically the party of Erdogan in Turkey, the AKP, is also a descendant of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes. Okay.
So
Got it.
so they are actually from the same, a political family, as it were, political origin story. Obviously that Turkey is a democracy, if somewhat flawed, but nevertheless is, it's that's the basic framework of the country. I mean, as I tried to explain, the Saudis have a quarter of the world's oil reserves. That seems like a number. What I was trying to explain to me mate the other day, that's the equivalent of every other country on earth that makes oil is a pub. The Russians are a pub, and next door the Americans are a pub, and and the Venezuelans are a pub, and they're all in a row, and they're all selling their pints at whatever price they can sell them for. But directly opposite them is a giant brewery. Right? The Saudis set the price. Yeah. Because if they want, they can just flood the market. The Saudis literally hold the price tap of hydrocarbons on our planet.
Yeah.
They know it. And the Americans know that too.
And so ultimately, they can be relatively passive. They don't have to come up with solutions to problems, but when somebody else comes up with a decent solution, they're the ones that can lubricate that answer to an epic degree. I mean, ultimately, whether Trump pulls this deal off vis-a-vis Gaza, what happens with Hamas, how much interfering will the Iranians do, all of those things, if it settles on a place, the amount of money and investment that the Saudis can put into Gaza or the West Bank or wherever is completely consequential. It changes everything.
But it changes everything what you're saying if the Palestinians move away from their Muslim Brotherhood organizations as their ground forces, as their basic organizational tool. They have to. And is that part of the deal? Is that what's really going on behind the scenes?
I would imagine so. The Qataris have always been, much more hands-on in the negotiations vis-a-vis Hamas, or certainly openly. I've absolutely no doubt that Saudis are deeply influential there, because the Saudis are deeply influential in Cairo.
Explain that to me.
Well, basically, Saudi Arabia, I think, sitting in the mid-40s population-wise now, so that gives it a sort of population size the same as sort of Spain or Poland. But its demographics are 10, 15 years younger than either of those countries. But traditionally, it had all the oil, it had all the prestige within Islam, with the two holy sites, of course, as we mentioned. But what it didn't have was manpower. It didn't have military heft. It has always lent on the Egyptians, who have always been broke, but a huge population along the Nile. I think they're on 120 million now.
Yeah. It's an enormous.
It's very much a military state. So they lent on the Egyptians for manpower and the Pakistanis. I mean, there's the thing about this opening now with the comedy festival as part of is actually the second time round. People don't realize is all that sort of, extraordinary medieval behavior of the last 25 years in Saudi Arabia. That was a new thing. In the 70s, Saudi was liberalizing. Now it wasn't like a night out in Nashville, right? Don't get me wrong. It wasn't, it wasn't Miami South Beach, but it was pretty liberal, and it was heading in that direction. There were cinemas, the religious police weren't on the streets, Westerners could get a drink, there was all that sort of thing. And it was heading that way. And then they had the siege in Mecca I can't remember what it was, 79, 78, somewhere around then.
And the Islamic Revolution in Iran as well. That freaked them out too.
Exactly, chimed at the exact same time. Although the ones involved in the Mecca siege were they were Sunni fundamentalists. They were connected directly to the Iranians, who were obviously Shia. But yeah, they were two giant shocks to the system. And ultimately, the Saudi royal family had to bring in expertise from the Pakistanis to put that down. And that was all live on TV. You know, it was a giant shock to the system. And the decision was made under the previous generation of rulers there, the one above MBS, sort of basically his distant uncles, went, right, we're locking it all down. So this is their second go at it.
Okay, now this is fascinating stuff.
You know, the decision was made, the lessons were learned of, okay, we can't tinker with this. We're going to have to absolutely shock the entire system. I'll tell you an example. I think from, you know, obviously I can't ventriloquize what the ruling class in Saudi Arabia think. But what I felt like, they built an entire entertainment complex for the comedy festival, okay? Big box development. I think there were 3 or 4 theaters, loads of restaurants, loads of parking, a place for all the families. There was a guy walking around as a Mr. Bean impersonator, and he was mobbed everywhere he went. It was quite the dent to the ego. You know, and they had the mascot wandering around, which was a big old-timey microphone with a face on it. But what there was, and this is sort of something would be really shocking to the Western mindset to get your head around. I think most Westerners know that pigs are haram in Islam.
Yes.
Right? Obviously, halal is good, haram is bad. Probably most Westerners wouldn't know that that's where dogs are as well. Dogs are traditionally, if not as bad as
they don't like a dog. They don't like a dog.
Dogs are traditionally very much not in the scene in the way that they're profoundly embedded into our society. I mean, they're literally in every home in Ireland. It's so odd to us that people wouldn't. But what there was in this complex, there was, and I believe it's a chain, it's called Luca. And it's where you can go and have dog encounters. And they had
Muslims having encounters with dogs.
Yeah. And there was like, you know, they had a Great Dane, they had Chihuahuas, they had all sorts of dogs. And Saudi
Is this like a red light district for dogs?
No, it wasn't that sort of dog pound. But no, it was so sweet. I stopped and watched, and it was just Saudi families. The people in Riyadh, again, I can't speak for the rest of Saudi Arabia, but the people in Riyadh were completely fluent in English.
So what you're saying is the society is totally pervious, right? It's not impervious, it's pervious. It's porous. Everything's coming in. The kids are all right. They're looking at TV. They're looking at Netflix. They're looking at YouTube. The censorship is disappearing. The place is opening up. And you can really feel it. And MBS on the top of this actually has a strategy.
Well, I think just to finish the analogy about the dogs, it was watching all these Saudi families just meeting dogs. And there was one little girl, she petted a dog for the first time, and then she gave her dad a big hug. He was in a thobe, which is their version of a dish dasher, the white robe. You know, so these were reasonably traditional Saudis. And she was like, I can't believe I got to meet a dog. And the dad was so proud that he made his daughter happy. And I felt like kind of my perspective was from the Saudi top brass perspective, us comedians at the festival were like human puppies. You know what I mean? We were kind of almost them showing their people, look, this is comedy. This is their inner lives. Here's Louis C.K.'s inner monologue. Here's Jimmy Carr's dirty jokes 5 in a row. Like, this is the West. Okay. You don't need to be scared of them. Look, pet them. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We only looked at it like we're going there and freedom of speech and da-da-da. They were looking at, you know, hey, look, see, it's Kevin Hart, yeah? It's okay, it's all right.
Yeah.
We can mix with these people, it's all right. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. It makes complete sense because the other thing is, I just want to focus in on this week and the politics of it and the economics of it, etc. The big prize for Trump is to try and get a deal where Israel is recognized or acknowledged by Saudi Arabia, and vice versa. Was there's any talk of that, or that's completely off limits?
I'll be honest with you, I did not engage anybody in the conversation about Israel.
About the Zionist state.
and in truth, David, I didn't, because it was such an optimistic time out there. And it's been so profoundly gloomy. You know my personal life, my private life. My wife is from Egypt. My father-in-law lives in Qatar. You know.
Yeah, you know the region.
I've had over the years, I've had people from the world of the Irish arts going, why aren't you speaking out about Gaza more publicly? And I'm like, has it occurred to you the fact that when I look at children being pulled out of that rubble in Gaza, they look like my daughters? This is really personal for me. You know what I mean? So in some ways, when it seems so counterintuitive, but when I was in Riyadh, I felt I could breathe out from that conversation for once.
Yeah.
I didn't need to have it because
that's interesting.
it's going to happen. You know, ultimately, the Saudis know they are holding an incredible prize in their hands. They know that if Saudi Arabia normalizes, the custodian of the two holy places normalizes its relationship with the state of Israel, that changes everything. That profoundly changes, because since the 70s, as part of that reconservatization of Saudi Arabia, they invested in a lot of mosques around the world. You know what I mean? So they have a huge amount of, in any city you're in listening to this in the Western world, there is a mosque in that city you're in that is directly funded in some capacity, one way or another, by the Saudis. And therefore it's what would you call the direction of its sermons that are being preached at Friday prayers is obviously going to be leaning towards the Saudi way of looking at it. Does that make sense?
There's an editorial. Of course, there's an editorial.
The editorial, thank you. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, there is freedom of speech wise, there's no point glossing over it. It is an absolute monarchy. I mean, people were like, well, you wouldn't have said anything about I wouldn't have said anything about the royal family on stage. But number one, it's not my damn country. You know what I mean? That wouldn't have made the people in the audience because the audiences they've their first ever comedy club opened 2 years ago. It's called the Comedy Pod. And it was an awesome experience hanging out with those guys because they were all young Saudis. The audience was exclusively Saudis, 50-50 men and women. Same with the two big festival shows that we did. Again, it was 50% women. Even if you take out any of the sort of highfalutin liberal principles that we both share, Dave, as Western men, and who've been on TV and radio and in the public forum for years and years and years. Nobody wants you to show up and tell them how they're doing their stuff wrong.
No,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Discretion is the better part of valor.
I think there's an extraordinary simplicity in the way in which the Riyadh Comedy Festival was received in certain parts of the comedy stroke. I was reading reviews in The Guardian, the usual suspects, right? What I'm much more interested in, I'm not interested in yesterday's discussion. I'm much more interested in where things are going, right?
Sure.
What's the direction of travel? If the direction of travel is this comedy festival and the football and the Ronaldo and the golf is suggestive of a country opening up. And because it is the financial heft, it's accelerating this process through buying ideas, buying comedy, buying whatever.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
If this is the way it's going, if the Trump peace in Gaza is part of that overall equation, we then have to think differently about where this is headed. And if it is a Saudi-backed West Bank, Gaza, at some form of peace with Israel, excluding Hamas, lots and lots of people on the street in Ireland and the West will go mad because it's ideologically not where they want to go. But if this is the direction of travel, this is where we should be in a podcast like this. Not talking about what should have happened 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, not seeing it through the lens of the Cold War, seeing through the lens of the 21st century.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a talk, and whether it gets back off the ground, of setting up essentially a rival to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, of basically coming out of Gujarat in Western India and bypassing Pakistan and then going into the mega ports that the Emirates have built, and then rail links taking it across the north of Saudi Arabia through Jordan and then popping out at Haifa in Israel. And that was all, those sort of conversations were moving on at a pace. And then the October the 7th attacks obviously happened. And history for the people of Gaza took a very dark turn. But nevertheless, those conversations are already being had in Riyadh, Tel Aviv, New Delhi, and Abu Dhabi. And Oman. They're seeing this. They can see that, and they have the ambition to basically bypass Chinese power and bypass Russian power.
So it's happening.
Yeah.
We're not getting it, but it's happening.
Massively so. And when you talk about the House of Saud, you've got the royal families in Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE specifically. The others are slightly behind schedule. But the three of them are rivaling each other in every field. And that is propelling them forward to an astonishing degree. In the case of Qatar, it's almost as if, particularly Qatar and the Emirates, they are where we in the West are going to be in 10, 15 years' time. A huge amount of this development in Saudi is about keeping talent and attracting human capital to their countries. The Saudis have massively educated their young population, and what they're really worried about is that the place won't be attractive to stay in.
Yeah, exactly.
They've gone and created 10 million fluent English speakers, and they've let them watch Netflix and YouTube and play on computer games for the last 10 years. They don't want them leaving. They want to keep hold of their capital. And so I know Qatar are probably the best of all the countries in the Gulf because my father-in-law lives there. And he's pretty close to some elements in the ruling house. What's astonishing that most Westerners wouldn't realize there is they have 3 million people in Qatar and about 350,000 nationals. And the rest are expats of different types, South Asians, Europeans, Filipinos. And to keep all those peoples happy, who are mostly not Muslim, you've got a lot of Ethiopian Christians. You've got a lot of the Indian and Nepalese Hindus, right? Near the airport in Doha, there is a thing called Church City.
Church City.
And next door, there's Hindu City. And in Church City, there is a Catholic basilica. There's various Protestant denominations. There's various Orthodox churches. And on a Sunday, there's 250,000 Christians worshipping on a Sunday in Doha. Now, to protect them, both the Church City and the equivalent next door for the Hindus, they are both technically palaces. So they are not guarded by the regular police. They are guarded by the Praetorian Guard that protect the royal family. That's how serious. That was the signal that the royal family wanted to put out to their people. If you attack these people in their churches, you are attacking my palace. Right?
Wow.
Now, that is a level of effort to protect your religious minorities that, quite frankly, puts the West to shame.
Max, as I said at the very top, comedians see things differently. This is the whole joy of Kilkenomics. This is the joy of working with you. Now, you're coming back next year, right? Definitely for Kilkenomics.
Oh,
it's
100%.
that idea.
Yeah.
You go, you gig, you see, you get the vibe from things, and you're seeing things differently. This has been amazing. We started with Ireland and moving statues. We started Ireland in the 1970s. We ended with Church City. There's a lovely symmetry in the whole thing. Look, wonderful stuff, Andrew. I just find this fascinating because this week, all the analysis is, a lot of the analysis is going to be from the same well, which is that the West and the Arab world are implacably opposite to each other, and et cetera, et cetera. What we're saying here is, no, the world is changing.
The world is changing very fast, and people don't like it. A lot of liberal people are actually deep down conservative on the inside.
You better believe it, my friend. You better believe it.
If you've been the BBC's Middle Eastern correspondent for the last 30 years, you do have an opinion. And you only share it when you're in the hotel over a couple of whiskeys with your other fellow journalists. But like I said, it's from firsthand, the Saudi royal family are trying to outrun the conservative elements within their society and just change so fast to almost break the velocity. That's how a plane goes up in the air. Will it work? Who knows? Was I blown away by the reception of the comedy fans there? I was incredibly touched because that's exactly how it felt when I was young in Ireland and people, all of a sudden, amazing comedians came to Dublin. We were like, what? Me and my mates, when we were 16, snuck in to see Jack D live. We were like, I can't believe Jack D came to Dublin. Like, wow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It seems so trivial now, but it's like
But it's a moment. It's a moment.
It's a moment. Like, there's 8,000 people in this arena, and I have a joke where the setup of the joke is, the world's a mess, brothers and sisters, and it's all men's fault. Women should rule the world, right? And the place went nuts.
Brilliant.
We're in Riyadh, and there's 8,000, there was a good 4,000 women like, yeah! And then there's obviously it's the switcheroo punchline. Look, everybody gets slapped in the face with a good gag. But the point is, they did that.
Yeah.
It's not North Korea. These people paid their money to go. They didn't round up a bunch of public sector workers and have them all wave a flag in unison. You know what I mean?
That like comedy is a kind of a universal language, but there is a kind of an English flavor of comedy, and there's an American flavor of comedy. Is there
Sure.
a Saudi or Muslim flavor of comedy?
Well, number one, Saudi is very influenced by America.
Yeah.
Whereas the Emiratis and the Qataris have a bit more of a British flavor, and the Bahrainis definitely, and the Omanis. But Saudi culturally has been very, very much US facing.
Yeah.
From going along to the local comedy club, me and Louis just sat in the back row and watched about 10 Saudi comics. A lot of them were doing comedy in English for the first time because they all wanted to be on the bill with Louis, basically. They wanted to be on the bill. I shared a bill with Louis C.K., right? And it was rammed. It's only 180 seat a room, but beautiful gig. And there was a lot of material about family life.
Right.
And it really reminded me of, again, Irish comedians disproportionately have material, and Italian-American comedians. You know, it was just about, everybody had basically an angle on, publicly, dad's in charge, but once the door's shut, it's the mother's actually the power.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They had a lot of that kind of joke.
That sounds disturbing, like the three of us.
Exactly.
As always, an absolute pleasure. And I will hopefully very soon in the flesh, and we'll go for the scoop and keep talking.
Yeah, 100%. Well, here's the thing. I will keep you posted, because the Saudis have the biggest dance festival in the world. It's called Sandstorm. There's like 100,000 Saudi kids raving for a weekend in a desert.
Whoa.
And I may be going to do the first ever comedy gig at it.
Oh,
so I'll keep you posted there. Like, I mean, who doesn't want to see that?
I'd love to see that. Amazing.
You know what I mean? Post Malone's headlining it.
Wow.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
That's mad.
A white dude with face tattoos is headlining a festival in Saudi? What?
Yeah.
That's the speed of the pace. But, you know, from what I can gather with the young people I met, they're well able for it.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant stuff, Max. Listen, we'll talk to you again. That was
all right.
I'll tell you what struck me most about that conversation with Andrew, because he was fantastic. I didn't realize he was so embedded or invested in the whole region and knows it inside out and backwards. But it's what he was talking about, the ambition of the Saudis is as big as anywhere else, is as big as China's ambition, you know, in the Belt and Road Initiative. You know, there is the Saudi Belt and Road Initiative, as he was mentioning.
Yeah.
But it is that ambition, and they have the money, and they have now also golf, football, comedy. And dance, apparently. Dance festivals.
John, exactly. Dance festivals in Saudi Arabia. Who would have imagined 5 years ago? And this is why that's fascinating. I think what we have at the Saudis have the money. The Egyptians have the manpower, as Andrew says, and the Pakistanis have the nuclear power. This is what the Americans are coming to terms with now, and realizing that they don't just have to back the Israelis, which used to be the case, but they actually have to get into bed with and play ball with a whole host of other regional powers, of whom the Saudis are the ones that they are closest to. And that's another reason why Saudi Arabia is so important.
And also draw them away from China.
Exactly, draw them away from China. I mean, again, the Saudis have seen what getting into bed with the West looks like, and they don't want it. So the Saudis export a huge amount of their oil to China. They're playing the game. Again, what we're talking about is this multipolar world. So there's not just two big powers.
Yeah.
There's many, many powers that are emerging. They've all got different interests. They've all got different assets. They've all got different strengths. They've all got different weaknesses. Some of them are coming from a religious background, like the Saudis, and trying to, in some way, liberate their people from a very, very old ideology and religion while still keeping their culture. Other ones, like, for example, you know, the Indians and Chinese are doing completely different things, the Pakistanis. So my sense of what we're talking about is just a reordering of the world.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing, whether it's at Sharm el-Sheikh this week or whether it's going to be phase 2 of this particular peace plan. Now, of course, this peace plan is predicated on a huge amount of imponderables. One is, does Hamas leave the scene?
Yeah.
And that's why the Qataris...
And the disarmament of them as well.
do you remember the decommissioning of the IRA? That took years. De Chastelin and this, that, and the other, and talks. I mean, it takes ages. But the reason that Qatar are in the game is Qatar finance Hamas, number one. The other reason that Qatar are in the game is that the Israeli attack on Qatar is what triggered Trump to change his view. Why? Because not only did the Qataris give Donny a plane, but they're actually incredibly wealthy. And America wants massive investment from the Saudis and the Qataris and the UAE into the United States. That's one thing.
Yeah.
So again, this has kind of outsmarted the Israelis, because the Israelis now realize that in actual fact, the Americans are kind of agnostic. Yes, they're very pro-Israeli, but they're actually very happy to do deals with the Arabs too.
And that's becoming an even bigger issue in America. I mean, you mentioned the Qataris there. They are setting up an air base in Idaho, a Qatari air base with F-1 fighters or whatever they're called.
Well, probably with American fighters, fighter planes.
Sure. But this is driving the MAGA base crazy, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and all that kind of stuff. And there is this movement in America, and this might be the undoing of Trump, the movement in America that is becoming anti-APAC and anti-Israeli. People are, for the first time, questioning, why are we putting so much money into Israel?
No, but that's true. But I mean, you're talking about the undoing of Trump. He's now at his strongest, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, so the key then is, do Hamas leave the scene? If they don't leave the scene, if they don't leave Gaza, can the idea of a technocratic Palestinian peaceful government, which is part 2 of the plan, actually wrestle control of Gaza from Hamas? I'm not so sure about that. Would the Arabs be prepared, like, for example, Saudi Arabia, to put in Arab soldiers in a peacekeeping force or stabilization force in Gaza if it meant that they were hunting down Hamas, which in effect would be Arabs doing Israel's job?
Yeah.
That again wouldn't go down well. Then, of course, if Hamas stayed there, will the Israelis continue? Or at least will the Israeli pullout be permanent? I doubt it very much. So there's a huge amount of stuff going on. And that's why the phase 2 of this is going to be more difficult, arguably, or maybe not more difficult, but as difficult as phase 1. But look at the positives, right? The idea of the Gaza Riviera is over.
Yes.
Trump's plan from last February.
Yes, thank God for that. Yeah.
That means that the risk of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is over, because the Riviera was predicated on getting the Palestinians to move to the Sinai in Egypt, all 2 million of them, opening up a real estate opportunity for American investors, right? That's now off the table. And that's a big shift. I know it sounds weird, but it's a big shift, right? It means that the Palestinians remain in Gaza as the people of Gaza. Gaza will be rebuilt with Saudi Arabian money, buckets and buckets of Saudi Arabian money. It also means that Trump has aligned himself as much with the Arabs as he has with the Israelis. That's very difficult to see from some of the commentary here in Ireland, but that, I think, is what's going on. And again, the key thing is the Arab money and the strategic notion that the world's changing. And of course, the Palestinian state is back on the table. The Palestinian state, the 2-state solution, is central to this plan. So I think we just take a breath. It's been a crazy week. It has been an extraordinary week. There's lots of things that have changed. I think Andrew Maxwell has absolutely nailed it in terms of what's going on in one of the lead countries. And what goes on in Saudi, because of their role in the Muslim world and because of their money and their influence in Washington, is absolutely crucial. It also shows you, John, how Kilconomics brings different angles, which is on in a couple of weeks' time, kilconomics.com. And you're going to bed and I'm going for my breakfast.
Yes, good
So
man.
I am talking to John. I am 12 hours ahead of him. He's going to bed and I'm just out of the scratcher.
You're
So I'm
always
full of
12
beans.
hours ahead of me, Mac.
That's, as I said, speaking from the future, Johnny boy. Talk to you next week.